Shalom Alechem, Assalamu Alaikum, peace be unto you. Welcome to 2 Samuel chapter 24, in which there are 25 verses. Verse 1, Adonai caused his anger to burn forth again in Israel. Verses, the anger of Adonai was kindled. So we have more of a rationale in the Septuagint that it was Adonai who caused his anger. He caused his anger to burn forth. What is the reason? We don't exactly know. However, in the Masoretic, we don't know anything. It just says the anger was kindled. So that's all we know. We don't know what was the cause. Septuagint reveals it is Adonai was the cause, but we don't know the rationale behind that cause. And this kind of not really answers the question, but this is the situation where King David numbered Israel. He did this before, but this time he did it, and it was a grave mistake. Verse 3, there's an omission of an addition. Okay, the omission was an addition. Does that make any sense? It says, your Elohim in verse 3. Your Elohim. Okay, so that's an addition, not an omission. And then it says here, desire versus delight. So why do you want this thing versus why do you delight? It's like King David is taking pleasure in this thing. No, he just wants to do this. Verse 5, talking about the city, which is in the middle of the valley, not a city in the middle of a river. Okay, it's not like Waterworld. And it says in the valley of Gad and Eliezer versus Gad and toward Yazer. Verse 7, Mapsar versus stronghold. Verse 8, compassed the whole land, which means to go around in a circle or to accomplish, versus gone through all the land. Not wildly different, just different terminology. Verse 9, number of the census versus sum of the number. Or sum of the census, you could say. But it is the number of the census. And then there is an omission of regarding the men of Judah. They were 500,000, not just regular men. These were fighting men. These were also soldiers. Okay, so from Israel, 800,000 soldiers, and then an additional, top of that, 500,000. So 1.3 million soldiers. That's even large when we look at modern day armies. That's a large army. 1.3 million. Okay, that's verse 9. Verse 10. Grievously, I have sinned grievously, or grievously versus sinned greatly. I have been exceedingly foolish versus I have done very foolishly. So it's not so much the actions, it's the character that he showed, or maybe it's just David's perspective that he sees himself as a fool in this instance. Verse 11, an omission of early in the morning. So David didn't just rise up in the morning at 11 a.m. He rose up early in the morning, which means before the light, most likely. I'm gonna guess between 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. That's early in the morning. Not just any time in the morning before noon. It says here Gad, the seer. So Gad was the prophet at that time. That's good information to know. So not so much a difference, just information, FYI. 13, big difference in verse 13. It says here, regarding the choices that Elohim gave David via the prophet Gad. The first one is 3 years of famine. Okay, 3 years of famine is a long time versus 7 years of famine. So that's a big difference. For instance, there were lockdowns that happened globally from 2020 to roughly 2023. That was 3 years of lockdowns. Now, if that went for 7 years, and it's only 2024 right now, so if that went even till now and then 3 more years, do you know how much damage that will do to a lot of people? How much more damage? So that is a big difference. We can't just glance over it or glaze over it and say, oh, 3 years, 7 years, so what? No, we lived through it. A lot of people lived through that time, and they can speak on just how damaging that was to a lot of people emotionally, socially, financially, and so on. But this is talking about a famine. It's not just lockdowns. This is a lack of food and possibly water as well. So 3 years famine, that is very destructive. Why would you ask for that? The next choice is 3 months being fleeing before your enemies. So 3 months, that's also bad. Think about what happened October 7th. That was how many months ago now? 2 plus 3, roughly, so that's 5 months ago. So 3 months of losing, basically. Or do you want 3 days of mortality in the land versus pestilence? And then there's an addition of question marks. So that's the translator's interpretation, that there are question marks after each of these choices. Decide, now then decide, versus advise. So advise means to know. So now know, or cause to know. No, it's decide. You have a choice before you. It says choose. So choose. Okay, actually choose was omitted. I didn't even realize that. So choose to befall you. Okay, I didn't mention that. But choose was omitted. So these are choices versus no choice. Or at least, not that there's no choice, but it's not expressed as a choice to be made. Although that's the implication. It's kind of common sense that these are choices. It's just not expressly described as such. Okay, so decide versus advise. Verse 14. So David decided to fall into the hands of Adonai. Why? Because his compassions are very many, versus his mercies are great. The footnote for this section, I'm very straitened. Where's that? I am very much straitened. I am much straitened, verse 14. Things are very narrow to me in the hard copy, it says. So, in other words, the situation is very tight, or there is much pressure upon David. Verse 15. There's an omission of, so David chose for himself the mortality. And, important piece of information here, and they were the days of wheat harvest. So what time is that? That is around Shavuot. That's the wheat harvest time. Okay. And then it says here, this is how long the pestilence lasted, from morning till noon. So pestilence is actually not a bad translation for mortality, but it lasted from morning till noon. So when is morning? Roughly, I'm going to say 6 a.m. or 9 a.m. And until noon, so that would be between minimum 3 hours to 6 hours. However, the footnote in the hard copy reads, for the word noon, it reads dinner time, literally dinner time, which can mean afternoon or evening, because dinner follows, actually no, dinner is lunchtime. Dinner means lunchtime. The meal for the evening is called supper time, so that that is noon. Okay, so that's actually false. So dinner time is lunchtime. I have to correct that because I had the idea that it can be as many as 12 hours. So no, it wasn't as long as 12 hours, but let's stick to 3 to 6 hours. So dinner time is lunchtime. Good thing we corrected that live on the air here. There's an omission in verse 15. It says, the plague began among the people. So it began from that time, morning till noon. Again, 3 to 6 hours. And then there's another omission in verse 16, talking about the angel of Adonai. It's not just an angel, it's an angel that comes from Adonai, serving Adonai's will. Withhold your hand versus stay now your hand. So remove your hand versus stay, keep your hand there, or pause. Threshing floor versus threshing place. Verse 17. I have done wrong, David says, versus I have sinned and have done wickedly. However, the footnote tells us in the Alexandrian text, the Alexandrian Septuagint, it reads, and I, the shepherd, have done wickedly. So he's acknowledging his sin as that he has done wickedly. Okay. Verse 21. Restrained. The plague may be restrained versus stayed. So the plague would be removed versus just simply paused. Verse 23, significant difference. Arona, it says here, as a king. So the Masoretic says he's a king. No, he's not a king. He's not a king. Arona is not a king in the Septuagint. He's not a king historically. This is a mistake in the Masoretic. And then it says here, these are the words of Arona. Adonai, or Elohim, bless you versus accept you. Why would David not be accepted? No, he is accepted. He's been anointed. But his actual words were bless you, not accept you. Significant difference there. Verse 24, another significant difference. There's an omission of a fair price. So David wasn't just buying it at a low price or trying to swindle him. He was very much like Abraham when he bought the tomb. I believe it's the burial place of Machpelah. King David is also following in Abraham's footsteps by purchasing this threshing floor of Arona for a fair price, for what it is worth, what it is valued at, honestly, not trying to undercut him. And then it says here, I will not offer to Adonai my Elohim a whole burnt offering for nothing, versus of that which does cost me nothing. So it's actually more specific in the Masoretic text. I have to give credit where credit is due. So King David is not saying, I'm getting it for nothing, although he could be saying that. However, it just makes more sense in the Masoretic that he's getting it. He doesn't want to offer burnt offerings for something that cost him nothing. So he wants to pay. So it's related to the payment of the fair price. Again, that was omitted in the Masoretic. Verse 25, the last verse of this book, 2 Samuel, second book of the kingdoms. It says, and Solomon made an addition to the altar afterwards, for it was little at first. And then it says here, Adonai hearkened or listened to the land, versus was entreated, and then stayed. The plague was stayed from Israel. So I want to clarify, it did say stayed in the Masoretic multiple times, and that doesn't mean paused. It doesn't mean just that it remained or that it paused. the correct interpretation or the correct understanding of this word stayed is stopped, means stopped. So the plague was stopped. Okay, whether, just to clarify, so there's no there isn't any confusion about that, about the definition of that word or understanding of it. So that's all for this book. We've completed this just on schedule, and I plan to release a abbreviated summary video for this whole book, so you don't have to watch all the videos, all the 24 chapter videos. I believe that would take, I don't know exactly how many hours, but it would take multiple hours, at least maybe 6 hours or more. I'm not sure. I didn't do the math, but it's going to take multiple hours. So to save my viewers time, you could just simply watch the summary videos for the biggest differences found between the Septuagint and the Masoretic text for the second book of Samuel, or second book of the kingdom. So thank you very much for your time. Until that summary video, I bid you all Shalom Aleichem, Yivarechacha Adonai V'yishmerecha, Salamu Alaikum wa Rahmatullahi wa Barakatuh, Irini Mazisu, Pax Vobiscum, peace be unto you. May the Lord bless you and protect you always, and Maranatha.